Hello and welcome to this training session, which is an introduction to Microsoft Volume Licensing Programs. My name is Simona and I'll be taking you through this training today. This is what we'll be covering in this training session. We'll start off by looking at the different ways to buy a license, and then we'll drill down into more detail on volume licensing. I'll take you through the top level differences between Microsoft's different volume licensing programs available, and then we'll look at some other options which you'll come across when you learn more about the individual programs themselves. Let's begin with the different ways that a Microsoft license can be purchased. The first way I've got here of buying a license is depicted by this, and we call this FPP or full package product. This method of buying a Microsoft license is chiefly aimed at home users going to a retail store, and generally speaking, although there are exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, one box equals one license. The next way of acquiring a Microsoft license is depicted by this computer here, and by this I'm meaning software that comes pre-installed on a new computer. But finally, what will become the main focus of this session, we've got the different volume licensing agreements themselves. But before we do drill down into more detail on these programs, let's just take a moment to consider the advantages and disadvantages of the other two ways on this slide to buy a license. We'll start with full package product. Now, the advantages of FPP include the fact that it is instant. You can just walk into a shop and buy it. The media is often included in the box, and there's even some support from Microsoft included in that purchase, and you can see that these are good advantages for the consumer. But what about the disadvantages for businesses who purchase FPP? First of all, it's the most expensive way to buy a license because it's not taking into account any volume discounts. Secondly, you can only use the actual version purchased. And then finally, from a software asset management point of view, in order to prove ownership, you must keep the receipt, the original media and manuals, and the certificate of authenticity, that's the COA, which is that hologram sticker on the side of the box. What about the advantages and disadvantages of a license purchased with a new PC or an OEM license? Firstly, it's convenient because it's already installed, so it's often a good value way of acquiring the license. And also, the OEM is obligated to provide support to the license holder. So again, you can see that those are good advantages to the consumer. But what about disadvantages? Firstly, these licenses cannot be transferred from the machine that it was bought with. They belong forever to the hardware they were purchased with, and you'll often hear the expression that the license lives and dies on that machine. Secondly, not all products are available through this route anyway. It's pretty much only the operating systems and Microsoft Office. There are limited downgrade rights with an OEM license, and similar to FPP, these here are the items which need to be retained in order to prove ownership. The COA will either be embedded in the BIOS, or for older machines it'll be that sticker on the hardware itself. Now that leads us beautifully onto appreciating the advantages of volume licensing. Firstly, only 5 licenses are required to start a volume licensing agreement. But yes, you guessed it, there are exceptions to that rule. But the point is that even the smallest business can take advantage of buying through volume licensing because they don't even have to be 5 licenses for the same thing. Secondly, you get unlimited downgrade rights. So that means if a customer has licenses for Office 2016 but would actually prefer to run Office 2007, then they can. And another benefit of volume licensing is re-imaging rights. The IT department can build the perfect machine with all of the preferred applications and settings, and then distribute an image of that machine onto other devices. And finally, we have easier software asset management. No worrying about COAs because everything is recorded in one of 2 portals. Let's take a look at those portals now. First of all, there's the Microsoft Business Center, which is the portal that customers who have an agreement called the Microsoft Products and Services Agreement, or the MPSA, use. Then there's the VLSC, the Volume Licensing Service Center, which is for customers who have every other type of volume licensing agreement. And what do customers use these portals for? Well, it's where they can access all their licensing information in one place. So they can view their purchases, download software, find product keys, and see their agreement renewal dates, etc. But where do customers go to see definitively how they may use a product? Well, actually, there's not just a single answer here, because look at the purple box at the top of this slide. How a product may be used will vary by the product, its version, and the route through which the license was purchased. So that leads to quite a few different permutations and combinations of usage rights, but they are all documented in various documents which are freely available for anyone to find online. The ones most relevant to volume licensing, however, are the two on the right. The product terms document is updated monthly and is a single document containing all the terms and conditions for how you purchase licenses for software as well as online services such as Office 365 through Microsoft Volume Licensing programs. And it also outlines how you may deploy and use software licensed under those programs. So this is an essential document to have to hand if you become the licensing expert at your organisation. Further information on how to deploy and use online services can be found in the Online Services Terms document, which is also updated monthly. I did promise you that the majority of this training session would be focusing on the volume licensing programs themselves. So what we'll do, we'll start by building up a list of all of the different programs available, and we'll talk through how you can be sure to choose the right program according to the individual circumstances. Now, the first thing you need to know when choosing the right volume licensing agreement for your scenario is how big the organisation is, how many licenses they will be ordering. Smaller organisations will be choosing from one of the programs in the top row in blue here. So that's plain old open, or one of the 3 different types of open value. Larger organisations will buy one of these pink programs here, Select Plus, the MPSA, an enterprise agreement, or an enterprise subscription agreement. Note that only Microsoft's LSPs, that's the licensing solutions partners, can sell these pink programs. The next thing you need to know is if the customer is prepared to commit to covering all of their desktops or servers in the agreement. So these 4 programs on the right hand side here require the customer to commit. In fact, you can see that Open Value company-wide has been aptly named. It has to apply to the whole company, not just one department, for example. The next thing to be aware of is that these 2 programs on the right hand side here are non-perpetual, and I've shown that with these little dots. The licenses bought through these programs are non-perpetual, which means they only last as long as the customer keeps on paying. The clue is in the word subscription. I think it's well understood that if you subscribe to something, be it a TV channel or a magazine, if you stop paying, you stop receiving the service. The rest of the program types are perpetual, so those licenses last forever. Another factor is that these programs with the little SA in a circle include SA, that's software assurance. We'll talk more about software assurance later, but suffice it to say at this stage is that it's a range of extra benefits, hence the word value in Open Value. The 3 Open Value agreements all include those extra benefits in SA. Be aware that with Open, Select Plus and MPSA on the left hand side of my diagram here, SA is an optional extra purchase rather than just being included automatically as it is with the others. Now, the next thing to be aware of is that so far I've been referring to how customers can buy their on-premises licenses, which I'm depicting here with these miniature servers. But what about online services? Well, all of these programs allow the customer to buy their online services through them, and because they are spotty, you can see that these licenses are non-perpetual. You can also see here that customers can buy online services through the customer portal with a Microsoft Online Services Agreement, MOSA. The last thing to mention on this slide is that the Select Plus agreement is at the end of its life. Customers can no longer sign a new Select Plus agreement, and by the 1st of July 2017, no customers will be able to purchase new licenses under a Select Plus agreement. Of course, since the licenses are perpetual, they will continue to be able to use these products forever. Now, if you look at the diagram, you can see that the MPSA allows you to buy on-premises licenses and SA as an optional purchase, which is what Select Plus agreement allows. But it also allows the purchase of online services under the same agreement, something that wasn't possible with Select Plus. And so the natural progression for customers who have had a Select Plus agreement is to the MPSA. Now let's go through some of the options that you will hear about as you learn more about the individual volume licensing programs themselves. So the volume licensing programs will differ by a variety of factors. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to fill in these 4 purple boxes with various things that may differ between the different programs, and we'll be populating this over the next few slides. But let's begin with agreement structure. And we've already had a glimpse of this in the diagram that showed the top level differences between the program types. But there are some specific ways in which the agreements are structured which will vary between programs. First of all, some of the programs include software assurance, and for others it's an optional extra purchase. So let's have a quick look at software assurance now. Here are some examples of the different SA benefits available, but the key thing I want you to remember is that SA is a whole range of benefits. In fact, that tagline in blue at the top of the slide is a good summary, providing technology, deployment flexibility and support to manage the software lifecycle. Now, it's not important in this session that you know the details of all the SA benefits. I'll just go through a few examples to give you an idea. First, on this slide, software assurance provides extra rights, and top of my list here is new version rights. And this is probably what SA is best known for. This simply means that when a new version of a product is released, customers who have SA on licenses for that product will be able to use the new version. SA provides rights to purchase other things as well, for example step-up licenses and the home use program. It can also provide deployment flexibility with benefits around virtualization and various training and support benefits. So I think you'll agree that the tagline at the top there in blue is a good summary of what software assurance actually is. Okay, moving on then with differences in agreement structure. We already mentioned in the overview that some of the program types require a level of commitment. So let's just remind ourselves which programs they were. Here's our overview diagram again, and the programs that require a level of commitment from the customer are the 4 listed on the right hand side. But what does this idea of commitment actually mean? Taking an example of a customer who is licensing their desktops, what this idea of commitment means is that the organisation must license what we call a desktop platform product or an enterprise product for every qualified desktop. So what we're saying here is that in order to qualify for one of those 4 program types that we identified on the previous slide, the customer must buy either a Windows license for every desktop, or an Office license for every desktop, or one of the suites of client access licenses for every desktop, and they actually get a discount if they go for all 3 products on every desktop. But what are these CAL suites? Well, they are collections of client access licenses, and there are 2 different suites available. Core CAL contains these 6 licenses here. So you can see that they get the standard CALs for Skype for Business, Exchange and SharePoint servers, and we call these the productivity servers, and also the Windows Server CAL and some System Center components to support their core infrastructure. The Enterprise CAL suite contains all of those plus some extra ones. For example, the Enterprise CALs to add on to the standard CALs that they get in the Core CAL suite. Our final structural difference between the different programs is around points and pools. What this means is that for some of the agreements, you need to put the different licenses on the customer's shopping list into these pools here. There are 3 pools, and they're listed on the slide. The systems pool is for client operating systems only, so Windows. The applications pool is for client applications, so you can see here I've got Office and InfoPath as examples. And then all the server stuff, that's the server operating system, the server application, as well as the CALs, goes into the servers pool. Now every product has a points value. You can see some examples on my slide here. So that means you add up the points total for each pool, and that determines the price level. So it's quite possible that the customer will be at different levels for different pools. And in fact, that leads us beautifully onto our next factor which differs between the programs. So here we go, the programs may differ by how the initial orders and price levels are determined. They may be determined either by counting the number of computers involved, that would be for those committed offerings, or, as we've just seen, by working out the number of points in each pool. On to our next difference then, which is that the volume licensing programs may differ by their agreement lengths. For example, an open agreement is 2 years long, while an enterprise agreement lasts for 3 years. But what does this actually mean for the different program types? Looking at agreement lengths then, I've got three scenarios which we'll go through here. A perpetual license without software assurance, a perpetual license with software assurance, and then finally a non-perpetual license. So the first one could be licenses bought through an open or a Select Plus agreement without the optional software assurance. The agreement will last for 2 or 3 years depending on the program, and basically all the customer can do during the time of the agreement is simply make additional purchases at the same price level. But what about at the end of the agreement? What are their options? Well, these will be perpetual licenses that the customer has bought, so they can carry on using the version of the product purchased forever. But they can't buy software assurance at this stage. They can only actually buy software assurance at the time of buying the original license, so they've blown it if they change their mind. This does mean, however, that they will need to start a brand new agreement in the future if they want to use a newer version of the software. What about this next scenario then? A perpetual license with SA. So this could be perhaps open value company wide, for example, or an enterprise agreement. So during the 3 years of this agreement, the customer can, as before, make additional purchases at the same price level, but because this scenario includes software assurance, they can use all of those lovely software assurance benefits we talked about too. At the end of the agreement, we want them to renew the SA so they can carry on using those benefits. The licenses are perpetual, remember, so they're only renewing the SA bit. They've bought the licenses to use forever. If they don't renew the software assurance, then they can carry on using the version of the software which was current at the end of their agreement forever, but they will have to start a brand new agreement for future purchases. And then our final scenario, a non-perpetual license. So this would be either of our two subscription programs, Open Value Subscription or an Enterprise Subscription Agreement. And during the time of the agreement, they can make additional purchases and use the software and all of those SA benefits as well. At the end of the agreement, of course, we want them to renew the whole agreement, but they do have the option to buy out to convert those licenses to perpetual, or they can stop paying altogether. And our last factor which differs between the programs is the payment options. For some of the programs, payment is upfront. For others, it's annual. And for others, for example, Open Value Company-wide or Open Value Non-Company-wide, the customer can actually choose either one of those two options. So hopefully you're now feeling a bit more confident about how these programs differ from each other and what some of the other factors are which may differ between them. That concludes this training session. I hope you found it useful and I wish you the very best of luck when taking the associated online assessment. Thanks for listening and I look forward to talking to you again soon about Microsoft licensing.